Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about linear analysis. Now, throughout theory so far we've kind of been skirting around this idea, but basically it's looking at music in terms of the horizontal movement rather than the vertical movement. There are two types, one where we look at chords in terms of their linear progression, and one where we look at individual lines. So let's start with the chords because they're probably a little bit easier and more familiar. So up on the screen in front of you, you have two progressions that you've probably seen a lot. So you might have noticed I like to use the passing 6/4 to start chorales. It's my personal crutch. So when we talk about this, we don't think of that second chord as really being a solid, honest-to-God 5 chord, right? It's more of it's just passing between the chords. And that's really what we're looking for in terms of linear analysis. So if you listen to this, we don't really hear that second chord as functioning. We hear it as just stretching out that first chord. So that one chord is being prolonged by that 5/6/4. Now we've been talking about the fundamental harmonies of things for a long time, and that's basically what this gets to. So the fundamental harmony there is not 1 5 6 4 1 6. It's just one large chunk of 1, right? Same deal with the second little snippet. We have 1 6 4 5 1. And we have the same issue here. We think that we see 3 different chords, but really functionally we're hearing 2 functions. We're hearing the big 5 and then the 1. So the 1 6 4 is not acting like a 1 at all. It's not functioning like a 1. It's just some sort of linear prolongation of that 5. So in this way, linear analysis isn't all that different from stuff we've been doing. We're just going to sort of take a step back and start to look at the larger picture. So instead of analyzing every chord, we're going to try and just look at the really fundamental harmonies. So the second example I have for you, a little bit different. This one we're going to try and look at how the individual lines move. So I've just listened to this. So if we try to analyze every quarter note here, we'd be in real trouble, right? This first one, okay, that's a nice C major chord. The second one, though, it's like A minor, but with a D and an E, I don't know. And then we get into more trouble as we get to the end of that first measure. This one looks like a G augmented chord, and this kind of looks like a G9 sort of thing. But most of the time we don't really know what's going on. So what we would do here is we'd look at each line and see if we can figure out what notes are really part of the chord and what just are non-harmonic tones on a larger scale than we're used to. So to do that, we're going to look at a linear analysis graph. Okay, so a linear analysis graph is going to look a little bit scary, but it's not that bad really. Just you have to take it one step at a time. It happens on multiple levels. This one that we have the original music on is called the foreground, so it's what we really hear. And then as you go up the levels, we get into the middle ground, sort of what's on the larger scale. And then the furthest level up, which we won't really deal with today, is called the background, and it's the sort of structural force behind the music. This owes a lot to a guy named Heinrich Schenker, who had a very popular theory about how to do this kind of linear analysis, but he also had some rather selective ideas about what was good music, and so his theory comes with a certain amount of baggage. We're not going to deal with that too much. It's just good to know where this comes from. So the first step with this linear analysis is to say, okay, well, let's see if we can figure out what the big chords are here. Well, we have this 1 chord at the beginning that we already found, and then this 5, really a 5/7 chord up here, and then a 1 chord here. So after we do that, we go to the next level where we're going to write all of the notes again, but just as note heads, and then we're going to add stems to the important notes. I'll talk about how to do that. So this is what that looks like. So you see the stemless notes. Stemless notes are going to disappear as we go up the levels of this analysis, and notes with stems are going to stay. So what we see here is just basically we're slurring between notes that are going to stay. So the C and the E both belong in the C major chord, and we're getting rid of notes that are non-harmonic tones. So we have C to E, and we're passing through D and D sharp. We have E to G, we're passing through F and F sharp. We have G to C, we're passing through A and B. All of those passing tones we don't need at the next level. They're just embellishing the music. Same thing here. This A was just a neighbor tone between these two Gs, and then we have these two incomplete neighbors. So an incomplete neighbor is sort of like an appoggiatura in this language. It's basically a neighbor tone that doesn't have its other neighbor with it. So we see two of those, one coming down from the E to the D, and one going up from the D sharp to the E. Okay, so far so good. Anything that wasn't a non-harmonic tone we're going to give a stem to and move up to the next level. So the next level looks a bit like this. And I beamed together, and this one's pretty easy. I think that we wouldn't usually see things quite as simply laid out as this. But we beam together things that are connected together or that form interesting patterns. So this big C major chord really is just being arpeggiated here, right? So the G to the C to the E, that whole measure is just the C major chord. This whole measure, just the G7 chord being arpeggiated here, and then this C major. If you went back a bit, you'd say, well, what happened to the other Gs and the other Cs, other notes? When you're in this and you have a repeated note, you're just going to get rid of it. We're thinking in long range prolongations of pitches. So this G, really I could get rid of this G too, because this G is acting all the way through this measure. So when I've beamed things together, I can collect chords together, I can get rid of notes that repeat. So this E and that E sort of repeat each other. So what we're left with is the fundamental harmony of this with all the embellishment gone. We have a C major chord, we have a G7, and we have a C major chord again. And so if we go back to the very beginning of this, you can kind of hear that in the very chromatic linear motion. So even though there's all that embellishment, we still feel that fundamental pull from 1 to 5 to 1. And we'll look at this a lot in class over the next couple of weeks. We'll explore it in both chorale form and in more homophonic textures. Okay, so things to remember. There are sort of two types of linear analysis. One is more chordal. We think of 6/4 chords in particular as just prolonging a certain harmony, certain function. And then there's looking at the actual lines of the music and seeing how they go together. This can be very powerful if you look at larger pieces than this 3-measure chorale. You can find large-scale patterns that are really interesting that connect to individual building blocks in the music. Hopefully we'll explore some of that in class as well. Okay.